African men in the middle dungeon who tried to suppress myself. That's left. All the African men in the middle dungeon who got sick and ill and weak were left to die. Some of them even got blind. The English colonizers will leave them there till they died. And after they died, they picked their bodies and trashed them in the ocean.
Hello guys, it's your boy Derek here once again. Welcome to my channel. As you know already how I always do it, I take you through the places of interest in our continent. And today's video, I'm at the Cape Coast Castle, one of the largest castle in the history of the transatlantic slave trade. And then today I'm gonna take you inside, find out more and more about the history behind this establishment. Please, if you have any information or places that you would want us to visit, I want you to leave that at the comment section. And then if you also have any question relating to our tourism, you can just leave it down in the comment section, and then I promise to give you answers and then take you through your places that you want us to visit. Kindly subscribe to our channel, and we promise to deliver the good, nothing but the best in as far as our tourism is concerned. So come along with me as we explore.
My wonderful families, I officially welcome you all to Cape Coast Slave Castle. My name is Tony Wiji, and I'm your tour guide. It is very important to know where we are right now. This place is called the Male Slave Dungeon. The Male Slave Dungeon comprises of 5 cells or 5 chambers. The first one, we are in the second chamber. Third, fourth, and the 5th one is the one from afar. In each one of them were 200 men at a peak season. So that means there were 1,000 men in the middle dungeon. That hole there was the only source of light on earth for the 200 men here. This place was very terrible and very scary, dangerous. There was a wide spread of diseases such as malaria, cholera, diarrhea, cancer, even yellow fever. What is very shocking is that on top of this middle dungeon, the English colonizers also built a church. The name of the church is Society for the Propagation of the Gospel. Before we start the tour, I would like to give a very brief introduction. There are 3 slave castles in the whole of West Africa. It is so unfortunate that the 3 castles are located here in Ghana. These are Elmina Castle, Osu Castle, and Cape Coast Castle. Elmina Castle is the earliest and the oldest, the earliest and the biggest castle. That one was built by the Portuguese in 1482. Osu Castle is located in Accra. It was erected by the Danish in 1661. That one is also known as the Christian War Castle, and this is Cape Coast Slave Castle. This one was built by the English in 1665. Date-wise, Cape Coast Castle is the youngest castle. However, this castle is 356 years old. The Portuguese were the first Europeans to come along the coast of West Africa, but they got to a place called Cape Verde. They were still navigating in the name of searching for gold, and eventually got to Ghana in the year 1471. Now, when the Portuguese arrived, they themselves were practicing what's called violent aggression. They were kidnapping the Africans along the coast of West Africa. But because the Africans were fighting back, the Portuguese realized that it was unsafe for them to continue that process. So they cheated their trading system. They came along the coast of West Africa and gave the West African very basic products like clothing items, red wine, sugar. Everybody in this world likes to show appreciation. The Africans in return will give them gold, ivory, spices, and other basic goods. However, in the year 1482, the Portuguese finally settled in a place called Elmina and built Elmina Castle. The Elmina Castle was not built for the transatlantic slave trade. That is why when you go to Elmina Castle, you'll realize that the dungeons there are different than the dungeons here. This one was built specifically for that purpose. And again, it was built at the peak of the transatlantic slave trade. The Portuguese in Elmina transported a lot of gold to Europe without actually transporting Africans to the Americas until 1492. When this man called Christopher Columbus claimed he discovered the Americas. And when that part of the world was discovered, the Europeans realized that they could cultivate sugar cane in that part of the world to produce sugar, because sugar was very expensive. The Europeans named sugar white gold. Everybody wanted to produce white gold or sugar. So the Portuguese in the Americas realized that they could use the Native Americans there as cheap laborers. But because the Europeans introduced many diseases into the Americas that killed the Native Americans, there was a priest we called Bartolomeo de las Casas. He's a Spanish and Catholic priest. He recommended that the Europeans should come for West Africans to the Americas to work as cheap laborers. And that was the genesis of the transatlantic slave trade. This history is very convoluted. I can't see everything. And it's 400 years. And the tour is just 45 minutes. I'm going to pause it. In the process of the tour, I'm going to reveal a lot. Any questions, please? This happens with Now, this is the first chamber. Now, the first chamber had 200 men. There were 200 men here. And I made mention of 5 chambers. So 200, 200, 200, 200, 200, 5 means 1,000 men. That was at a peak season. At a rainy season, we were about 150 each one there. And the maximum number was 1,000 men. Those windows there were the only source of light for the English colonizers. But the male dungeon was known as the slave halls by the English colonizers. They themselves didn't call these a dungeon, they call these slave halls. Right above our heads stands a very big hall. We call that hall the mouth of the walls of the castle. And because the English colonizers out there were very proud, they always wanted to know whatever was going here. They trafficked the hall. So in case the African men tried to break the doors, the noise would just pass without that. Because of that, the English colonizers knew whatever was going on in the dungeon. Below that whole line 6 holes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Some men were held to chains and shackles, the chain, in order to restrict them from coming or moving closer. When the English colonizers came here, the smell was very bad to the fact that anytime the English colonizers came here for a few minutes and went out there, they did smell like dead bodies of animals. It was truly strange that anytime the African men passed over to just go through and eventually get into the ocean, I am about to show you something that is going to change your lives today. Please come this way. Now, when you look at you will realize that when we are standing like that, ask a lot of grace, you see grace all over. Don't you? It is nearly impossible to see grace in the second, third, fourth, and the last year. However, the original floor of the entire main slave dungeon is grace that we see. What you see out there is not the original floor. Slavery lasted for over 300 years. It was a new dungeon that millions of enslaved African men definitely slept here, ate it, waited until they died. Because of that, they had decomposition of feces, urine, blood, food remains, and human remains formed that darkened floor and covered the priests. However, in the year 1974, a group of archaeologists came here and excavated the floor of only the first chamber. after the excavation was initiated, the darkened floor that was excavated was gathered and transported to Accra for further examination to be initiated. After the examination was initiated, the archaeologists were fully convinced that this darkened floor contains traces of DNA and food remains. But the archaeologists left that small portion as evidence. Listen. You can come closer, please. This portion. So after all these parts was excavated, this small portion, I understand now, was laid as evidence. And this contains the food remains and DNA of people. Basically, this is the real evidence of enslaved African people here in the country. Any questions? You have a lot to say. Is connected to the church on top of the male dungeon. So the English Renaissance would worship God in the church, and see people stand there and look at African men from the church to the male dungeon. This is the part that we all don't understand. Now the floor that leads to the next and to the last chamber is very slippery. You take your time and you walk slowly.
Alright, so this place is the last chamber. Right there lies the response cell. That cell is different from the 5 chambers. All the African men in the middle dungeon who tried to left, all the African men in the middle dungeon who got sick and ill and weak were left to die. Some of them even got blind. The English colonizers would leave them there till they died. And after they died, they picked their bodies and trashed them in the ocean. This is not part of the castle. When this castle was built, this wasn't here. And when the African men were here in the dungeon, this altar was not here. The altar was established after the abolishment of the transatlantic slave trade. But it used to be a very big town, very huge town, right? The town was the exit of the African men. So all the 1,000 men in the middle dungeon were not allowed to walk through where they came from. They were all forced to stand to the door we call the door of no return. But the standard system called sealed off in the year 1834 to officially mark the punishment. But when you go out there, I'm going to show you the town. It's big. It's even bigger than the dungeon of the men. Any questions, please? These are reefs that were brought here by the global African diaspora to pay respect to the ancestors who died in the male dungeon. This one. This one is on the bodies. Please just have a look at it. We have a lot to see. was the church on top of the male slave dungeon. The name of the church again is Society for the Propagation of the Gospel. Let me show the 4 identified graves, please. There are 4 identified graves. 1, 2, 3, and 4. But this grave is for black men. The other 3 graves they are for English colonizers. The African man was buried here is called Philip Kwame. His father used to be a chief's agent. His father used to work for the English and the chiefs. Because of that, when his son Philip Kwame was 11 years old, he and other 2 boys were taken refugees. Were taken to London, but the other 2 boys died. Philip Kwaku survived the condition. He studied theology at the University of Oxford. Philip Kwaku was the first African to become an Anglican priest in London. He became the priest of the church on top of the male slave dungeon. Philip Kwaku was not an enslaved African man. His name is not pronounced Kwaku, his name is pronounced Kwaku. And because the English colonizers couldn't pronounce Queen, they mispronounced his name Kwaku. So Queen was anglicized as Kwaku. This man promoted Christianity and the English form of education. He was born in 1741. He died in 1816 at the age of 75 years old. Let me show you the other 3 groups. These 3 graves are not for African people, they are all for colonizers. Before the grave that I'm standing lies the grave of an English lawyer by the name C.B. Whitehead. C.B. Whitehead died at the age of 38 in 1812. The cause of his death is not known to us. We don't know what killed him. These 2 graves is for a couple, the husband and his wife. The husband is called Captain George MacLean. Captain George MacLean was the governor here in the castle from 1830 until 1844. He sailed off the channel back in the middle of the dungeon in the year 1834 to officially mark the abolishment. Captain George MacLean was born in 1801. He died in 1847. At the age of 46, malaria killed him. And this is a grave of MacLean's wife. Her name is Letitia Elizabeth Landon. Some historians claim that Letitia committed suicide after she found out that her husband, MacLean, was cheating on her with a black woman. There are others who claim that Letitia didn't commit suicide, but it was the black mistress of her husband who poisoned her. I believe in that one. Because after Letitia died in the bedroom of the husband, who was the governor then, the governor was still in a romantic relationship with his African mistress we call Helen Karaman. She died at the age of 36, he at the age of 38, the governor 46, and Philip Kwaku 75. West Africa was known as White Man's Grave because malaria killed many of them. Any questions, please? We have a lot to see, please. This is a very small cell we call the meal punishment cell. You know, back in the middle dungeon, I made mention of 1,000 men. The African men in the middle dungeon who tried to fight back for their freedom and rights were brought here. All the African men who fought back were brought here. There are no windows in this cell. And this cell used to have 3 doors. The first door, the middle, and the third door. There are no windows in the cell. I personally do not call this a cell. I call this cell the grave of the castle. Now if you're a man in the middle dungeon and you try to fight back, they'll bring you here, they'll close the 3 doors, no food, no air, no light, no water, until you die.
slowly and painfully to serve as a lesson. Listen. Basically, there are no windows here, no windows at all. There were three doors, obviously, from the first door, the middle door, and the first door, and the third door, sorry. 1, 2, 3, three doors, no windows. No, back in the old dungeon, I mean, mentioned 1,000, and no here, there were no 1,000 here, 1,000 in the middle dungeon. Some of them tried to fight back. Such men were brought here to die, or to killed. Not less than 8 men were brought here at a time. After they were brought here, the English colonizers who closed the door, the London pack, no food, no air, no light, no water. So they all died, slowly and painfully. So that means they'll come and check if some people are there who take their bodies and dump them in the ocean. Wow. So we all died in the process. When I go keep up with the lights out and close the door.
Can I ask a question before you do that? What's this for?
Yeah, there was a door right there, but that door was sealed off to design a grave.
Okay.
Was sealed.
Okay.
So you want to there's a door over there?
Right here. There was a door here. The first, the middle, and the third door here. So if you're African American, no guys, no baby, no food, no air, no light, no water. So man. Lovely door. Any questions? Please be very mindful of your hands.
Okay.
1, 2, 3.
Okay, so why are there?
These are reefs that were brought here by the African Americans,
Okay.
the Caribbeans,
Okay.
and the Black Europeans, because they believe their ancestors were the ones that did them.
Okay.
When they come, they laid the reefs here in order to pay respect to the ancestors who died.
Okay.
Please be very mindful of your heads once again.
Is that door original?
Yeah, good.
After you.
courtyard to the door of no return. That's the door of no return. The English colonizers forced all of them to the tunnel to the door of no return. And let me show you the tunnel, please. Another part of the tunnel system, but this is not the exit of the tunnel. This is where the English colonizers would stand and urge the African men to keep walking through to the door we call the door of no return. I'm going to show the exit of the tunnel, but the entrance to the tunnel is where we saw the altar back in the middle diagram. Now this is how you look at the tunnel system. You watch your head first, you take a step second, you watch your head, and you come out. Please. Those of you fall down there, I don't know how you get out.
Ah, wow.
Absolutely filmar. Aber es ist doch diese Ja, mach wieder anders. Das ist einfach komplett anders, was wir das gemacht haben.
This is where the tunnel ends. And from where we are standing, we were supposed to be seeing a male slave dungeon. But because the tunnel got blocked off, that is why we can't see it. But there used to be a door right here, we call the door of no return. Very small door right here. Now we call this door the door of no return because this was the final exit of all the enslaved African people or all the African men in the middle dungeon. But this where we are standing right now, we were supposed to be seeing the middle dungeon because that's the starting point. This is the end of the tunnel, and the door of no return was here. But the tunnel system got blocked off in the year 1834 to officially mark the portions. But this door of no return was sealed off during, so I can't give you a specific year. The reason why this door of no return got sealed off was because the sea waves were very violent. So the English colonizers blocked this door off. After this door got blocked off or got sealed off, that was not the end. Another door was established. Or there was another door of no return, and that door is closer to the female dungeons. So the African men came through that entrance and then to the other door of no return closer to the female slave dungeons. That is where I begin to. But any questions, please? You have a lot of secrets. It's a spy hole. You know, you saw some spy holes in the film. So they'll stand there and have it. Okay, so this is a very small cell we call the female punishment cell. That door right there is the female dungeon. So these are the female dungeons, these are two dungeons. These are the female dungeons. So the African men came through the tunnel system, through the cage. One of the female dungeons, out of the female dungeons, 250. The English colonizers would go through the doors, would go sexual abuse them. But there was some African women who didn't allow them, they tried to fight back. Now if you're a woman in a female dungeon and you don't allow the English colonizers to sexually abuse you, they'll bring you here to punish you. Okay. Not less than 5 African women were here. This is where they menstruate, they defecate, they pass water, they have rashes on their bodies. They were here from not a place that they were from. After that, we bring them back to the female dungeons. The only difference between the female dungeons, the female punishment cell, and the male punishment cell is that the male punishment cell was a death sentence. You are meant to die or to be killed. But this one was just to punish them or manipulate them for some days. Then we just bring them back to the female dungeons. Any questions, please? Just have a look belief system. Let's go to, I'm not going to close it anymore. So when we are So the duration of the enslaved African people in the dungeons was 3 months, maximum, 2 weeks minimum, because it took the nations 3 months to get here. So the Africans were in the dungeons, the male dungeons and the female dungeons for 3 months before they were shipped. Every 3 months they shipped people every 3 months who came in the dungeons. The female dungeon, and there are 2 female slave dungeons. The other female dungeon is opposite this one. In each one of them were 250 women. 250 women there and 250 women here. So that means there were 500 women at pieces. 150 here and 150 there. 300 at a pieces. The only source of light to prepare for them were 1, 2, 3. The conditions were very bad. There was some wide sort of diseases such as malaria, cholera, diarrhea, cancer. This place was very unhealthy, very scary and dangerous. Many women were pregnant in the female dungeons because the colonizers abused them sexually. All the women who were pregnant in the female dungeons were taken to an English community, which is not too far from here. Such women had access to all the items, shelter, food. The children to whom they gave it to were biracial children. The English colonizers didn't give them African names. Names like Johnson, Wilson, Peterson, Lanson, Madison, Simpson were given to them. Remember back in the dungeon, I said there was a church on top of the dungeon. That church was a school also. The first European schools in West Africa, known as schools. And that was a school for the biracial children. So the biracial children were educated. They were not enslaved people. They were the very people who grew up to be the elites and the privileged ones in the first West African societies. The English colonizers back home, the African women, wives, the Africans, names that were given to them, or the word that was used to describe them was wench. And a wench is a prostitute. Any questions, please? You have a lot to see, let's go. Alright, so base is the door of no return. Now we call this door the door of no return because this was the final exit of all enslaved African people. Originally, the door of no return was a very small door right here. It was an angle when a new journey began and an end of an experience was totally disconnected. We call this door the door of no return because it was through this door that millions of enslaved African people walked through and never came back to Africa. The big slave ships that transported all the enslaved African people didn't come close to the castle. They were about 100 meters away from here. However, the English colonizers had small boats to bring the boats closer to the castle and force the Africans onto and transported to the bigger ships. In that order, all the enslaved Africans were shipped off to the Americas. That journey across the Atlantic Ocean from West Africa to the Americas is called the Maiden Passage. It's scary and very dangerous. During that time, the English colonizers had 13 colonies in the US. Over 40% of all enslaved African people were being transported by the Portuguese. The Portuguese normally transported Africans to Brazil. That is why Brazil has a very large population of African people. Amongst the Europeans, all the Europeans that transported the Africans to the southern part of America were the very ones who transported the majority of the enslaved African people in the Americas. Today we are going to walk through millions of our ancestors walked through and never came back to Africa. Some of them were taken to Haiti, Jamaica, Barbados, the US, Brazil, Mexico, and many more. Any questions, please? Yes, sir.
So it's a sorrowful moment right here at the Cape Coast Castle, man, seeing the dungeons, the activities that went on here. I'm downhearted. I'm in a sorrowful moment, man. I don't understand why a fellow human being have to go through this. Well, this, whoa, I'm short of words. Guys. The sorrowful moment.
The door we just walked through is called the Door of Return. The Door of Return was introduced in the year 1998 as part of a historical festival we call Harvest. Before the Door of Return was introduced, there were skeletons of two people that were brought back to Africa, specifically to Accra. These two people were enslaved African people who were taken from West Africa to Jamaica in Jamaica. We call them Samuel Carson and Madame Crystal. Samuel Carson was taken to the US and Madame Crystal to Jamaica. He died and were buried there during the transatlantic slave trade. By the year 1998, their skeletons were removed from their graves and brought to Accra. From Accra, they brought them to another place called Abanzi. From Abanzi, they brought them across the Atlantic Ocean through the Door of Return. This is a symbolic movement. This is to tell the global African diaspora that although their ancestors will never come back, but because the current African Americans, Black Europeans, and Caribbeans are the descendants of their ancestors who were in the dungeons, can come back to their roots or return to their roots. That is the significance of the Door of Return. Aquaba means welcome. Samuel Carson and Madame Crystal, their graves, their skeletons
are buried at a place called Nassim Manson Slave Riverside. That is where majority of the Africans that were born here took their last bath. Because some of them were from Mali, Burkina Faso, and Ivory, they walk. So when you go to Nassim Manson, you clean in the river before they bring you to the swim. Any questions, please? Now, we are not done. I'm going to take you upstairs. Let's go see the residents of the English garden. Listen.
Guys, so we are going to the residence of the governor, so just come along. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and I promise to bring you more and more as far as tourism in our countries.
Where El Castle is located. It's not too far away from here. proclamation of the gospel. Many years after the abolishment, the church became a children's library. And this is the home that is connected to the male slave dungeon. The English colonizers would worship and pray in the church, and the same people come right here and pray the African men in a male slave dungeon. We all do not know why. My wonderful families, this is where I'd like to end my presentation. Please don't forget there are 3 castles in Ghana. Elmina Castle, Osu Castle, and Cape Coast Castle. Elmina Castle was built by the Portuguese in 1482. Osu Castle was established by the Danish in 1661. And Cape Coast Castle was built by the English in the year 1665. I know slavery is still going on. And as a people, let's come together. Let's educate the younger generation so they don't repeat the same mistakes our ancestors made many centuries ago, and the mistakes that they are still making. I truly appreciate your cooperation. My name again is Tony Wady. Thank you very much. I wish all of you travel. Yes. Thank you.